Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the hinge of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka I'm dry for Lent, but God didn't say shit about Dayquil.
And I am the black metal guy, aka how do you give yourself a hangover for a week? I'm joining the death metal guy in a period of sobriety, although mine probably won't last as long. Um,
I like that we're both just kind of sick. You know, I've got my cold and...
we had a rough time, yes.
Yeah, a group of feminist witches on r/witches versus patriarchy placed a hex upon me, and now
Yeah,
I'm
well,
just
you have to find their vault of crystals and destroy them in order to break.
I'm gonna discover their dreadful phylactery and set it aflame.
I actually once did have a love spell put on me by a witch, which was actually pretty chill, and guess what? It worked.
Did it involve a beej? Because that's most of the witches I've interacted with.
A what?
A BJ?
Oh, well, eventually, yeah. I mean, sure.
No, that wasn't the love spell itself, though.
No, I wasn't totally privy to what it was, but I had to eventually conduct a ritual to break it. Serious shit.
Very nice.
Welcome to the black metal guy world.
Oh yeah, it's just doing cool witch shit. Apparently,
yeah, it's a lifestyle.
So yeah, everybody, you get to put up with my cold voice for this episode, and given my track record with illness, probably another episode after it. Real quick, in the Terminus co-prosperity sphere, before we fire up for today, a little bit of news. Let's do your plug again for Old Mill first.
Hello, yes. We would like to encourage you to buy the Stonehenge Alliance benefit compilation For All Time by our bro at Old Mill Productions. If in case you haven't heard, they're planning on putting a highway through the tombs of the mighty ancestors under the sacred plane, this will go. It will leave Stonehenge visible, but destroy. Whether you think of it in terms of archaeology, whether you think of it in terms of sacred landscape, or kind of both, like I do, you don't want that gone, right? And even if you have no direct connection to the UK or anything like that, right? If you're just interested in paganism or history or enduring culture or cool piles of mystic rock, should be a thing for you. We've got some people on this comp that you might not expect are Vapentak, which is a pretty interesting UK kind of black folk thing, which has a very thought through kind of ruralist aesthetic. Gorsed FM, which is a guy we know who I would not have expected to be doing something with Old Mill, just different sort of scenes. I think that's a Bool God project. Let's see, what else? We've got Lung Toucher, who I haven't actually heard, but I think that's rawer black metal than you'd normally expect on this. Revenant Marquis, who are quite popular right now. Robes of Snow, our guy. And Avsky, which I think people are also very into that Avsky release that came out last year. Not to be confused with Avsky, the bangin' bulldozer black and roll band from 20.
Yeah, the old Swedish one.
Dude,
yeah.
I think they're going to put out a new one soon, and I'm so stoked.
Really? Oh, that's cool. I'd be down to revisit that.
I've just seen a couple reissues, and I have a feeling. You know what I mean? Fuck your values, fuck your beliefs. The one lyric for the whole song.
It's like the version of Kraft that I actually like.
Oh, for sure. No, exactly. Yeah, or it's like black metal guys listening to G.G. Allen making G.G. Allen good.
G.G. Allen was already good, man. I don't know what you're talking about, but
yeah. Well.
In addition, one from me. So this is just a little heads up to guys, especially in kind of the Hessian firm and the DMU crowd. Long-running Argentinian death metal band 1917 has put out a new record, I think just last week, looks like March 1st. If you're not familiar with 1917, they are a kind of proggy, like a little bit technical take on early 90s death metal. I had a few of their records from back in the mid-2000s that were very good, very interesting records for people that are into deep listening, old school death metal stuff. You know, flat production, these are our riffs, make of it what you will type stuff. And I've just always been charmed by them, and they've always had trouble branching out beyond South America just due to limited distribution. But the new record, Omnicrisis, is out. It is not available digitally. If you want a copy, you message the band on Facebook, and they will provide
that's
you one.
real.
Exactly.
Dude, you should order one using the Terminus funds.
Yeah, I should do that. I think I might actually. That would be cool, because I do want to cover it. It's just impossible to find. Yeah. But just so everyone knows what it's like, they did release a promo track online. So this is off Omnicrisis. This is a track called Gestas Decrepitas. So let's just listen to a couple minutes of that, and I'm interested to get your take on it.
Really liked that.
Yeah, it's really cool. I guess listening again, it's been a while since I've listened to them, but I guess it kind of reminds me of Anata a little bit.
I think I see what you mean.
Yeah, they've got that kind of...
It's been years, but I remember.
Yeah, they've got that kind of arcing, stately style, but with some of the more kind of aggressive thrash rhythms in there. I don't know, they're a band that's a pretty unique combination of parts, and I wish more people were aware of them up here.
Yeah, that was really cool. That definitely fits in with the sort of the Hessian firm vibe, the kind of dark metal that Nick and that the guys in Mephitis talk about. Because it's very death metal structurally, but it has this kind of rich sense of harmony and kind of spiritual quality that you're more likely to get in black metal. And it's very, shit is brooding.
Yeah, so like I was saying, if anyone's interested in that, I will acquire a copy, but if you guys want a copy, you go on Facebook and you message them. And you send them, I don't know, some cash in an envelope or something, probably. It's old school. All right, so before we get to our rundown, real quick, follow us on social media. Me, the Death Metal Guy, over on Facebook at Terminus Podcast, or the Black Metal Guy on Instagram at Terminus Extreme Metal. And then if you're really dedicated, you can donate to us, or no, I hate that term, donation. You can subscribe to our content.
There you go.
On Patreon or Subscribestar. $3 and up gives you access to the Terminus Prime bonus episodes, and $5 and up gets you access to the Terminus Black Circle, our private Discord server where we share our experiences with dispensary weed and argue as to whether we should be doing more historical stuff on our bonus episodes, which is interesting. Apparently a lot of people are interested in that now.
They want more, like, more bonus episodes, or...
I think they want more like full-fledged kind of like scene rundown stuff, and
that's kind of I was thinking we might have to eventually go there. In which case, we'll definitely need to keep be doing like a monthly or more basis. But we could do that.
Yeah.
I still think complete Spite Extreme Wing discography. Got to do
it. Definitely that. We got to do. Well, we've got 1,000 ideas we've been kicking around, so. We don't we keep that for the pay pigs. We don't just reveal that information here.
That's what that is a salacious rumor. It sort of it kind of gets people excited. Also
be all yours for $3 a month.
Speaking of the patron stuff, we had one guy who started following us a month or two ago just up his donation from $5 to $20, which is really cool. Thanks, dude.
That is really sick.
And that upgrades him from the rank of Black Metal Hermit to War Metal Barbarian Werewolf Overlord.
Now we got 2 of them now.
It's true. Yeah.
All right, so a little bit of a different format this time. We were doing 5 records. Why are you doing this to me on the weekend that I'm sick?
Oh, because they're all short.
Yeah, that's true. So we got like 3... kind of shorter reviews we're going to do, because we got 2 EPs and like a 20-minute full length, and then we've got a couple more sizable records, and it's just kind of a mix of everyone today. So what have you got starting us off?
Yeah, this is like Terminus Zine Digest Day.
I kind of like it.
Yeah, we do one like this a month would maybe be a good idea, but here we go. Yeah. So, first off, Malthusian Kommand. That's command with a K. Don't get it twisted.
Of course.
They are from Chicago. The command with a K may remind you of a band from Chicago called Commandant. Like Commandant, it is just extremely ugly black war metal. Frankly, I like this better. The new record is called Unravelling the Purity Spiral, and it's an EP. All right, then. Going to pair that with a new one called Grabschlöfer by a band called Goifer or Goifer from probably not Gopher from Switzerland, who are part of the Helvetic Underground Committee, which is a pretty cool black circle that I've heard. Don't know super well, but I've heard good things about. I guess Unravelling, who are pretty popular, is part of that. And this is a release on Repose Records. Dude has been very supportive of the show in the past, so we're glad to cover one of his things. This is, and it's just straight up black metal. Yeah.
And now third, for one of our 2 longer reviews today, we've got the debut record by Draconi Septem called Hyperion. This out on Time Tombs Production, which I assume is probably their own imprint they use for themselves and friends bands, something like that. This is a sort of sci-fi themed, odd kind of melodic black metal band from France. Very, very 2000s in a lot of different ways, so I'm looking forward to talking about that.
Oh, I think they said Time Tomb is a new label. I saw that on the YouTube.
Yeah, but the book series that they base all their stuff on, the Hyperion series, the Time Tombs are an important location in it, so I assume that they probably run it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Just holy shit, wow. That's great.
That
Great
is
lore.
very cool. Oh, I guess it's also me next. Yeah, so in the fourth slot, another short one. This is the debut full-length, self-titled by the band Zatrata from Poland. This was actually originally digitally released late last year, but now it's finally getting a physical edition through Selfmadegod, so I said I'll allow it. And this is a sort of a crusty death grind band in the style of a few sort of unknown bands from that area, but a lot of which I've heard and enjoy a lot, so I'm looking forward to kind of introducing this little micro scene to people.
And last, a fan submission from a guy who is also a patron. This is Exsanguinate's Violence is the Natural Law. This is a very independent release on Bandcamp. It is pay what you want. You should check it out. But this is cool, very cool, difficult to describe, fits in with the general outlaw rock thing we've been talking about as far as distinctly American sounding black metal or black metal-ish music. Sort of psychedelic Western thrash, I guess.
All right, first up, Malthusian Kommand with Unravelling the Purity Spiral. You know, the only missed opportunity was, I mean, shouldn't it be Malthusian Commando? I kind of like that too.
No, I like the imperative. Malthusian Commando would be fucking hilarious. I mean, that sounds like more of a hardcore band.
Well, you see, you're thinking of it as like an imperative. I'm thinking of it as like a governmental superstructure, the Malthusian Kommand, you know?
Yeah, see, those are both cool, but I feel like if this had more punk beats, Malthusian Commando would be awesome.
That's fair. So, aren't you in contact with one of these guys? Didn't they approach us?
Well, yeah, he didn't approach for a review, actually, which is kind of, it's like, obviously, please approach us for reviews, but it's kind of cool. He wasn't like, hey, review my band. He just got in touch and was like, hey, just found your show. It's really sick. Thanks for doing it. And I was like, wow, dude, thanks. It kind of meant a lot to me because, he's like, somebody just listens and reaches out. That's pretty cool. And then I was like, oh, this guy has a band and it's called Malthusian Kommand. And I was like, I've heard of that band. They had some weird, they had some cover with some black armor on it.
So that's like all you need to be interested in a band.
Exactly.
Really.
Like, oh, it was that one with the black. I archived that in the armor files. So I checked it out, and within a few seconds, I was like, well, this is fucking cool. All right, dude knows what's up. Based on... This band has been somewhat popular on the internet, I think in part because the first record, they have tapes, and the first record had that black armor cover was just pretty sick. And maybe they have some context, but it's done fairly well for something this niche. And based on, the aesthetic and whatever, you might expect, and the name, you might expect some, modern American kind of war metal stuff, kind of drawing on, some Diocletian revenge pastiche, right? Mm-hmm. And that, that there are good versions of that. There are a lot of bad versions of that. But instead, what I got was a band that immediately reminded me of one of our mutual favorites, which is a Terminus keystone, which is Nidden Division 187 from Sweden in the 90s. Sort of war metal if it were just black metal.
Yeah. It's black metal with an intensely warlike atmosphere.
Yeah, you could call it black war metal or whatever, or just the kind of war metal I like, or whatever. But it shares members with Dawn. And so it has, there's a lot more color in it, let's say, and a totally different sonic palette. And so this is also to some extent, these guys are definitely into their sort of, Ross Bay style powerlifting black metal skin thing, right? And so there's definitely some of that in here. This is not like this is much more sort of like pared down than the Swedish stuff, but you could hear all these connections, and this is just aesthetically pretty cool. The first demo hit me as like, okay, this is solid. This one hits me as a significant step up. What did you think, bro?
Overall, I did enjoy this a lot. I still think this is the sound of a band getting their feet under them to a degree, which I think is kind of like, I think that's going to be it for most of the records on the show are kind of like, okay, so we're starting with an idea. We're doing, I think it's a show of all debuts, apart from our last record.
Pretty much, yeah. And this is the first official Malthusian Kommand release. Yeah, I hear what you mean. Yeah.
So what's interesting to me is that, so there's a war metal aesthetic going on. The way these songs are presented is sort of like, as you said, Ross Bay style war metal songs. But the actual content within hews a lot closer to kind of a traditional Swedish style black metal. Just overdriven and made a lot nastier, which is an interesting idea. I like the idea of, the whole war metal format. Well, I mean, you can kind of insert whatever you want into that format. You know what I mean?
I think that's absolutely right, because it's like
war metal. It's sort of like war metal being a technique, like when we've talked about grindcore.
Yeah.
War metal is something that sounds like war. Grindcore is something that grinds,
Yeah. War metal is a vibe, and if there's any formal thing about it, it's just sort of relatively short songs, lots of blast beats. Hard to say much beyond that, really, right? Relatively short songs, lots of blast beats, and a mood, as you say, a kind of war mood. A mood that doesn't have maybe some of the more gothic or romantic or folky qualities of black metal.
Yeah, definitely. Let's go with your first sample, and we can just kind of talk about the music.
Cool. This one is called Murder Strike. So we're going to start with some sick power chord shit, although I think kind of inverted power chords in a way that sounds very cool, and then it's going to open up a bit in a way that I think is pretty characteristic of how a lot of these songs work, and unusual for war metal.
There's nothing like some goblin vocals to wake you up,
Oh, yeah. When we reviewed that Astral Tomb and I talked about how much I love riffs that sound like power tools?
Yeah.
That last one, just straight weed whacker, man. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's the most dissonant stuff on Panzer Division.
It is, but it's more. Yes, it's like the best parts on Panzer Division. A lot of Panzer Division it's like the back end when they start pulling out the stops. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
yeah. Like it's like the back end, and some of their best riffs have this really liquid quality, whereas like all the Nidden riffs sound like that. Right, this sort of liquid quality and these sort of distressed inverted harmonies and whatever. But yeah, so that riff is obviously super sick. What did you make of the developmental stuff in the middle?
I enjoy this band in their kind of liminal spaces. I think they've got some really interesting ideas for how to develop these songs, and I think that's kind of the hinge point for this band is what they're able to do with that in the future, because you'll actually hear throughout the course of this EP, they've got a lot of different ideas for how do we get from one sick, like, hyper-speed blasting war metal riff to another. It's always about how you fill in those gaps that really determines the quality of a band like this, and my later sample will get into that a little bit. So one thing these guys really like doing, which is why I think it's so Swedish, is specifically the sort of chord shaping they're using on their riffs. They're using a lot of these sort of dissonant, like fourth or sixth intervals,
Yeah.
And then they're just moving those around the fretboard in the way that I was going to write originally, and then I backed off, but then you wrote it like early Dark Funeral would.
Well, yeah, because what you wrote something smart. You were like, yeah, so I mean, I think like I immediately went to Nidden, right? But you noticed, well, this also just has a lot in common with this broader current of 90s style Swedish stuff. And you wrote like, you're right, this sounds like what I thought Watain was supposed to sound like.
Yeah, and that's sort of like what I imagined Watain was supposed to be like, and it's not. Although, actually, I went back, and it's like, I did, to make sure it wasn't the totally off base, like, no, Rabid's Death Curse kind of does sound like this.
That's what I suggested in the notes. I said Rabid's Death Curse might.
Yeah, I was thinking specifically of their first record.
Yeah,
obviously, this is a lot faster and more war metal than that, but you can see the parallel. I think just the heart of this really lies in Swedish black metal that is now deeply unfashionable. You know what I mean?
Which is really cool. Yeah, so basically like the chord structures that sort of got, I mean, you could say Orthodox BM sort of, and Orthodox BM and Norsecore kind of took these chord shapes and ran them into the ground. But yeah, if you play them with real crazed intensity and you're actually trying to write riffs instead of just block chords, and you're mixing it up with some other styles of stuff, it's really good. And I think, and something specifically about the tonality too, right? It has that dissonant minor quality that, like, the Swedes got it from the Norwegians to some extent, right? It's Dissection and these other bands distilling certain things about Mayhem and Emperor and whatnot. But, like, you have that dissonant minor quality that a lot of the Scandinavian bands have, but without any of the things that make it sound dated sometimes, right? I'm not saying it always sounds dated, but, like, for instance, if we've talked before about how certain kinds of Emperor riffs or maybe certain kinds of mayhemy riffs or dark throwing riffs, ones that sound like Greet, Hall of the Mountain King or whatever, or ones that sound like horror movie soundtrack.
Yeah.
Right? This kind of spoopy Devilman riff.
Yeah.
Right? These, and you can listen to something like Dark Funeral and hear quite a bit of that, right? But that's from back then. That's from back then, right? So it makes sense. But, like, the cool thing about this band is that they're using those chord shapes without those period-specific eccentricities, right? And so it's just, all we get is that trace of classical harmony or melody with just, like, Sonata for Gatling Gun in D minor, right?
Well, I would even say that it's sort of like a lot of these riffs, especially the tremolo riffs, are sort of arranged like Swedish black metal riffs, but then the the interval choices are more like early death metal riffs.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, like you can hear kind of like old Deicide or old Morbid Angel in
or
some
Blasphemy,
of these riffs.
right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, as far as I know, I can't remember a Blasphemy riff. They all just kind of blow right at you. You know what I mean?
I neither of us are huge Blasphemy dudes, but I've listened. I think there's some cool Blasphemy for sure. But yeah, so let's listen to, since I've been talking about them, no specific thing to say except like, let's just listen to some Nidden and think back to that, listeners, we've ran our mouths for a bit, but think back to that cool Weed Whacker riff. Right? And think of how sort of taut and furious that is. And then let's listen to the beginning of Judgment Dawns from Nidden's only full-length Impergium.
Yeah, we remembered that song's like a minute and a half long, so we just played the whole thing.
Dude, I missed that album. It's been like years since I listened to a full Nidden song. That's so fucking good.
Why are we like the only people on the planet that care about that album?
Yeah, we've tried to compare. We've both tried to compare things to Nidden on the show, but always kind of in this push comparison way, where we're just like, please pay attention to Nidden. But like, this guy really gets it, I guess.
Yeah, I think especially after listening to that song, he has to have listened to this record.
Yeah, so some signature character. You people, listeners, I think you could hear those. I mean, I always talk about liking whiplashing riffs, but this or that riff that on Malthusian, right? Those are like the essence of whiplashing riffs. Right? You could hear this sort of ghost quality of classical music that makes it not just grinding death metal. You could hear these sort of strange harmonies that aren't totally just disso. And just those vocals, which are disgusting. These are a little higher, but similar idea. And crazed drumming. What do you make of the drumming on Malthusian? I haven't really... I remember hearing some good parts, but it's not quite as flashy as the drumming on Nidden.
No, it's not flashy. There's more to dig out than you think. Like, it's something we talked about on a previous episode. I forget in reference to what in particular, but like the blasting is really fucking fast on this, which is again a thing that's been forgotten in black metal. What if we blast beat but like do it like really fast, like you're supposed to? I think that overall it does a pretty good job of adding to that sort of like just sadistic drive to this music. That's what I would describe this as. This is very sadistic black metal, you know?
Yeah. I feel like yesterday I was listening to this and I did hear some part where I was like, damn, that drummer is hauling ass. I just can't remember specifically what it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, Yeah, so I guess let's get so there. I've done that. We've had our Nidden moment, and now on to you.
All right, so real quick, my sample. This is off Surplus Killing, which I guess is like the sort of hit single of the record. That's one that they printed T-shirts for and shit. And this is an example. Yeah, they're all sold out, but yeah.
Yeah, of course. There you go.
So this is, I figured, this is a pretty high tempo album in general. I figured you'd take one of the speedier parts, so I decided why not take one of the slower ones.
Cheers, bro.
So you're gonna hear kind of this like section bookended by these fast, pretty cool tremolo riffs, but then there's a sequence of developmental riffs that are on the slower side, and that's what I really want to draw attention to. So let's just check this one out.
Cool.
So what do you think of it? Well, you were asking me about development. What do you think about the development there?
Honestly, I kind of spaced at the beginning, which was my fault. But just like we sort of were talking about it. I think it works, right? We were talking about there was some moment where you said this is very Watain, right? Where it drops, beat drops out a little bit.
Start doing those just arcing, like swaying between two big dissonant chords against each other. Yeah.
Yeah, and the cool thing is that I don't know if in their prime Watain were that guilty of this, but certainly at their worst they were, which is that, we've talked about the dreaded halftime orthodox arpeggio, right? This does not fall into that trap because although it slows, it doesn't lose momentum, right? It's got this kind of lurching quality to it.
Yeah, it's something that like mid-mutilation would do.
That makes sense. And then because they're American, they put a two-step under it, right?
Yeah.
But very Watain chording for sure, and I like the way it builds back up to the blast. At the very beginning, though, there was some sick vocals, right? Surplus killing.
Yeah, you got I didn't know if they did like a gang shout like "Hey" behind that, but it sounded like it. It was pretty cool.
Cool.
I guess so. I guess to me, what this music's kind of hinging on is structurally, it's right there. They've got a really good idea of how to get from these big war metal parts to each other, as I said earlier in the episode. I think that my only issue would be, I think as far as the tremolo riffs go, a lot of them are just so kind of spare and gestural. They're coming from a place in black metal that you don't really hear anymore, which is like this sort of early mid-2000s thing, a lot of it. But there is such a rigorous minimalism that at the end of the day, a lot of the riffs do end up sounding like each other,
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Like, I feel like he does. I feel like there's a lot of character in the more kind of squiggly, fast, thin-sounding power chord things that I was been geeking about. But I do think that in some of the chorded the parts where it's like fast or aggressive chorded riffing, some of those do fall into the sort of these are the dark funeral chords quality, right?
Yeah.
But you know, I mean, here it's all delivered with such aplomb that like it doesn't really. It's an EP, like, you know, it's 20 minutes of extreme intensity, so it's not like it's not so much a strike against this one, but it's definitely a thing that they could work on. Is how do you give those?
That's the way I see it. It's like it's fine within the context of like 18 minutes, but then I could see that dragging on a full length. So
For sure, yeah. So it's like how do you either expand on the atmospheric ideas of it, maybe do like cool, catchy, sustained chord stuff. You know, could you do evil Orthodox Senko stuff, or could you just build longer melodies with those, right?
Yeah. Well, overall, yeah, it's a good EP. I'm glad you showed this one to me. Definitely curious to see. It's weird to imagine this being, like, really popular online, but I guess it's picking up steam, which is, I mean, one, good for them, too. It seems like the internet black metal scene has gotten very different from what I remember, you know?
Yeah, in some ways it's a lot worse, in some ways it's better. It's,
Well, I mean, if they're promoting stuff like this, I would say it's better. I was just imagining...
Yeah.
I was just imagining an endless array of, like, post-black...
Well, no, there is that, but that's the parallel universe, right? That's the sort of like trending on Bandcamp page, right?
Yeah.
It's like here are your media endorsed records. But yeah. So this is fucking sick. It's definitely a you know, it's a stepping stone in their sound, but I think that this record in itself is definitely worth repeat plays. Like given the sort of condensed quality and the relatively short length means I'll probably listen to this a fair amount. Also, tidbit, these guys are all literally power lifters.
Yeah, definitely worth knowing that just absurdly jacked personal trainers apparently is the lifestyle of this band, and we heartily endorse that.
Indeed.
So, good record. Let's take a quick break and we'll get on to another one.
This is a little one, Gash, and you're listening to Terminus.
Alright, we are back with another short one. This time it is going to be Goifer's premiere first demo, Grabschlöfer, out on our buddy Repose Records. So, we talked about Repose a little bit on this show. He's been a big supporter, so it's good to finally feature some of his music. And I think that a lot of this demo has to do with kind of a musical blind spot for me, so you should probably take lead on this, because this seems to have to do with a lot of sort of forgotten mid-90s Scandinavian stuff that you're better versed in than me.
Oh, well, thanks, bro. But, you know, I think you also found a good connection for this. Yeah, I mean, I think this is... Yeah, it pairs well with the Malthusian, because I think they're both drawing on reference points that should be similar reference points that should be bigger now. So, yeah, this is a great example of storming black metal in the sort of the grand Scandinavian tradition. However, it's Swiss. And it does, I think they find some interesting ways to make it sound kind of mountainous. As far as this band's situation, they're from, so the Helvetic Underground Committee, I said at the beginning. I remember reading an interview with the Repose guy in the old Millzine back in the day, back in the day months ago, where he said he'd been hoping to work with the HUC, and so it looks like he does, and he is now, and that's great. The only project I really know from there is a band called Ateigar, Ateiggar, who have this kind of Faustian alchemist's laboratory up on the snowy peaks kind of vibe. And what set them apart, it's a two-man thing, and what set them apart was that they basically wrote the second Kvist LP. So that Kvist is a famous Norwegian band, or sort of underground legend Norwegian band, that wrote a record called For Kunsten ma vi evig vik in 96, and then just disappeared. Sort of like what Emperor could have been if they hadn't taken their checks to the wank bank, right? And one of the most convincing and cool worship projects I've ever heard. And I think that's a big influence on Goifer too. Maybe I'm reading into it, but I think so. Could be one of those two guys. Their names both start with the stage names are great. Their stage names I think are both Houth or something, or Fauth, Fatuh, and this guy's stage name is Big with 2 O's and 2 G's. So why don't we lead off with we've each got it's a short EP, we've each got a sample. So mine is from the beginning of the track S Noble Here. A fell voice on the wind. We must turn back. We must make for the gap of Rohan. Man, how about that eagle moment and that the strange, the mountainous Saruman wailing.
Oh yeah. No, I really like that. Repose Records always seems to be interested in stuff that's traditional but sort of out at the same time.
Yeah, because he does a lot of more kind of deliberately weird stuff, but he's very rooted. You could tell the dude actually likes black metal, and so this is, I guess, like if he's gonna do it, he's gonna pick a weird version of it.
Yeah. So it was interesting, like in your notes versus mine, the comparisons, because Kvist is like a total blind spot. I don't think I've ever actually listened to the Kvist record. I've seen people talk about it, but I had just like moved on, and I had like kind of picked my stuff by the time I came across it. You know what I mean?
Sure, I get that. Yeah.
And so that's a blind spot for me. So the way I described this was as though someone had a project where they took the sort of the weirdest and most liminal parts of Take and made a band out of it. Because Take is a band that's known for these, massive sprawling melodies. It's like you're at the top of the mountain and you see the entire landscape and you're running down the mountain to go on adventures or whatever the fuck. But everyone forgets that the reason that those melodies land so hard is because there's all this weird liminal stuff. There's these gnarly kind of burzum or dark throne parts, but they're filtered through Host as a musician who is very technically capable for that scene. So he does these strange kind of sprawling, almost prog-tinted versions of them. And then I listen to this demo, it's like, oh wow, so it's just the weirdest moments, the most kind of abstracted moments of like late 90s Scandinavian black metal, but now done on purpose and, you know, sort of channeled into full songs.
Yeah, so Toka was actually, as we've talked about, Toka was a little bit of a blind spot for me. I'd listened to some of their newer stuff, but I've been listening on and off to over Björgvin Gradar Himmerik this year, and, you know, it's fucking great. And if I had to have one word to describe it, I'd say it's nimble.
It's very nimble, yeah.
Very
it's elf
agile
music.
guitarist. Yes, very elfin for sure. Yeah, not in the lame... Not in the lame sense, but in the actual sense. He really, clearly listens to classical music and has an ear for chord changes, like sophisticated chord and key changes, like harmonic involutions, things that would seem jarring to the people of a younger generation who've grown up on quote-unquote melodic black metal, which is, as you say, all the hook parts from Toka, right? Yeah. So, no, I hear that because Goifer is very nimble as well. But I think in a lot of ways, Toka is coming out of... They're drawing on this, let's just say high elven black metal, right? Or sort of very kind of, this stuff like Dawn and... Kvist and these kinds of, you can think of a few others, Sorin, Thy Primordial, these kinds of bands in the mid-90s who were doing extremely serious, kind of highbrow black metal without the fripperies of symphonic stuff. And like semi-high budgets, but still pretty unhinged. And so Toke is like takes that and he takes it back to the punk and the folk and stuff. I think that's kind of his achievement. He takes that and he brings it back to like some of the like he makes it really earthy again. But so this is definitely Goifer is definitely high elven black metal. This is some serious Noldor shit. So for a comparison, let's listen to Kvist's Min Likam Ermeg Blot and Bird. And this is, I'd say the comparison is clearer if you just listen to the whole album, but like, you'll hear it here.
Oh, so this is where Urgahal got all their ideas.
Does Urgahal sound like that? I thought Urgahal sounded retarded. And I like Urgahal, but they sound retarded.
Urgahal sounds like a more retarded version of this, but like the fast parts of Urgahal on like Massive Terrestrial Strike, yeah, they sound like the
I don't know
in this.
I don't know that one that well, but I know Thick Fog Till Death. Oh man.
No, I've never liked Urgahal, but Massive Terrestrial Strike sounds like that a lot in places. Although I guess I forget that Urgahal's way earlier than I remember, because that was only 98. So I guess I always think of them as
this.
I always think of them as a 2000s band. You know.
I get what you mean. They sort of had they had kind of the intense Neanderthal brow ridge version of that style that would become more common later, right? But yeah, so you could hear how that actually sounds kind of like Nidden, right?
Yeah.
Sort of whiplashing melodies, sort of lots of disharmony laced in, but it all still sounds kind of like noble and resolute. And Goifer had, in that sample, I think in the blasting riff, there were these cool sort of, semi-harmonic, disharmonies, and then when they brought it back to that thrashy punk riff even, the turnaround to that, if you just listened to it glancingly, sounds like a regular sort of BM turnaround, but there's actually really cool chord changes happening in that, and so it's a little like Kvist. I think it's harmonically like Kvist, but it's also like Toka. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and then, another thing to say is, we've talked about how the bass of this kind of sounds, but this is also really weird music in a lot of ways. It's got its own sort of pet eccentricities that I think are like half the charm of this demo. So, my sample is coming off the last track, Degasaima. Something like that. So we're going to listen to
the...
something like that. So we're going to go to the beginning of that track. And so we're going to open with a sort of French take on a big Toka riff. And then it goes way off the rails from there in a really cool way. So let's check it out.
Cool. Strut.
That is very weird. So what's the order of operations there is you got the big Toka riff, and then you've got the keyboards that come in sort of out of nowhere but work really well. And then it drops into this sort of I called it kind of like a churning sort of pest noir thing. But it could probably be attributed to a lot of different stuff.
And then this big major shift, like in the Nightside Eclipse style, kind of I Am the Black Wizard style key change moment, and we're in this ray of light major.
Oh yeah, well what's weird is that it's sort of a gnarly folk black riff under it, but then just this chiming keyboard thing over it, which is completely major key. Like, it's almost like a polyphony kind of situation there. It seems to intersect. It's like they were written in really different rooms, you know?
Yeah, it's funny. I was paying more attention to the big thing over top, so I'll have to listen more for the thing under it. But yeah, I don't know if this scans as that eccentric to me, because again, like, this is that kind of region of, you know, like, grim, angry high elf, mid-90s black metal that just is, to me, what Scandinavian BM should sound like. And so the idea that you have this play between harmony and, you know, melody and dissonance, and that you have trade-offs between, you know, things that sound folky and things that sound weirdly punky and grinding, it's more like, that's kind of what I want out of the show. You know, it is unfamiliar to me because they don't make them like that anymore. I mean...
Well, yeah, I would say... I mean, I think it's eccentric just because it's such a forgotten kind of branch of the whole thing. I think it's only not eccentric to you because you've spent half of your life listening to this very precise niche.
Fair enough. And also, to be fair, I think that he does try to... You know, he's picking up on the range of this style and saying how much. I think what you're picking up on there is right, in the sense that there's this sense of range of how can we navigate between these different parts, and then he's like, how can I make these all as kind of different as possible without making it schizo?
Yeah, no, and I think that's a tough line to walk, but I feel like we've talked about this a little bit, how it seems like there's more and more bands coming out that are interested in these, like, liminal spaces of black metal, the places where sort of, like, different niches fused back in the 90s and 2000s, and it was kind of awkward back then, but it's like, what if we just take that as a starting point and then we build off that foundation into something unique? And I think this is kind of a case of that happening.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I think another thing that's very toke about it is just all the punk beats on it.
Yeah, and I know that you're a sucker for, like, big epic medieval melody over, like, bonehead punk beat.
Oh my god, that thing at the end, yeah, I forgot about that until it came in on the sample, and I was just like, that was so cool. Just, yeah, it's like, alright.
I guess we're doing this now, but,
yeah.
No, it's excuse me. It's definitely really interesting. I have trouble making a solid conclusion just because this is so, like, relatively brief. I mean, we're only looking at, like, 3 songs, like, 15 minutes music apart from the intro. But I'm definitely interested to see what happens after this.
I would say, yeah, I mean, the first song is good. Like, I knew I'd like this from the sort of, like, swooping Wagnerian fifths on, like, the first track. However, clearly we think the second 2 are stronger.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
So, overall, good demo. Interested in hearing what else the guys in Switzerland have for us. So,
Black metal guy, serious seal of approval. You are welcome in my hall anytime.
You know, death metal guy seal of approval too. I like it weird. So, all right, we'll take a quick break, and then we'll actually do a full length.
Hey, it's Kari from Sepulchre Curse.
And I'm Jakob.
You're listening to Terminus.
All right, we're back. And now we've got Soul Draconi Septem with Hyperion on Time Tombs production. So this is a French 3-piece black metal band, I guess.
I thought it was a 6-piece.
Is it a 6-piece?
I don't know. Maybe it is just 3. Maybe they have, like, they were listing extra personnel.
I think they had some guests and stuff.
Yeah.
So, what is this pulling from? It's pulling from very weird sci-fi black metal from the early and mid-2000s. But it doesn't really sound like industrial black stuff from that era. Like, it doesn't sound like a Borim or anything like that. It kind of is its own thing. Like, the closest thing you can really describe it to is like a sort of sped up, filled in summoning in a way. You think that's accurate?
That is right. Yeah, it's summoning with a more kind of you had a good word for sort of like sci-fi meets fantasy. What was it?
Sword and Planet?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, Swords and Planets. Yeah, future fantasy kind of vibe. That's definitely the vibe I get from this. So it's like future fantasy summoning with more... A friend of ours says he always thinks of summoning as kind of a martial industrial band.
Yeah.
Right? Like, not exactly using guitars, but not really after black metal things. And this kind of has a similar quality to that. And it...
Yeah.
Definitely similar mood. Kind of just constant epic. But definitely a little more Cybertronic.
Yeah, so I did a little bit of research, so apparently this band is all themed around a series of novels called the Hyperion Cantos that were released in the early 90s. So it's a set of sci-fi novels that are extremely hard to decipher even from, like, summarized descriptions of them. But it seems to have something to do with questions of, like, super far future society and time travel, and it's got this sort of abstract, dreamy quality to it in the same way that, like, really early Heinlein might have. Mm-hmm. And so everything on this record is about those novels. I know some of the main bullet points, but it seems interesting. I kind of want to check it out now.
It's got a really cool cover.
Yeah, it does have a very cool cover. I believe that is supposed to be the Shrike, which is this biomechanical monster that protects the time tombs where you go because time flows backwards there through some trick of physics, and the Shrike prevents people from getting into them and accessing its power by impaling them on the Tree of Thorns, which is some massive metallic tree where it impales you and you die and are resurrected on it constantly for eternity. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, for those of you who can't see it, it looks kind of like a bone praying mantis as imagined by the guy from Evangelion.
Yeah, it does have a pretty Evangelion quality to it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, I guess, I mean, really the only way to get into it is to play a sample, so we can kind of talk about what's going on here. So, this is off, something distinct that happened here. All of our samples are off the back half of the record, which I think is a lot stronger than the first half. This takes a while to spin up, and it takes a while to, like, kind of get your bearings on what is the band trying to do in this music. But this is off what I think is supposed to be kind of the big single track called The River Letha's Taste is Bitter. So let's just go to the beginning of that and rip through a couple minutes and see what we find. right, so my theory about this record is that it is a very literal attempt to recreate 70s and 80s prog rock through black metal. I think that's the central conceit of this music.
Like, that's a big blind spot for me. I mean, this doesn't sound like Yes or King Crimson, so to what are you referring?
Oh, I would say there's like some Jethro Tull in it.
Oh, I think as soon as you say that, I get what you mean.
Yeah, there's some of that. There's some like Focus from the Netherlands. Even stuff that isn't necessarily prog rock, but it was adjacent to it, like just like Steely Dan or something like
Chicago.
that. there's this whole, because you got to remember, like 70s and 80s prog and sort of prog adjacent stuff got really into like high fantasy and sci-fi for a while there.
That's true. That has led me to many disappointments. I see on the cover some sick drawing of an astral knight and a chick with big tits, and I listen to it and I'm like, oh no!
Oh no, it sounds like Rush. Oh Jesus.
Exactly. I have a soft spot for some Rush, but I like Working Man and Godzilla.
Oh, I fucking love Rush, general, dude. So, but I think that's really like the fundamental unit here is when prog rock would like get a little more spacious. You know, it's like, oh, we're cruising in our we're cruising in our rocket ship around space. We're all listening to Hawkwind right now, and it's cool. You know.
I could hear kind of, I mean, it's not the things I like about Hawkwind, but I can hear what you mean. Hawkwind did have a saxophone at times. The other thing is, I think this is, well, it has to do with the French thing, too. I think this is, there's some synthwave here.
Yeah, because that's, so the two big elements.
Retro soundtrack pastiche, and so this brings us to the saxophone.
Those are the two big elements of this music that make it so erratic, which are, one, the synths, which are very 80s electronic. I think it's less modern synthwave. I think it's more like Terminator 2 soundtrack or something like that.
But that's what synthwave takes as its like.
Yeah.
It's what's the term? The fancy term, locus classicus. That for it is like what it aspires to is Terminator.
Yeah, I think I just give these guys the benefit of the doubt. I think they're closer to the source material than a lot of people are. So there's that, and then there's the saxophone, and I know you're not a fan of that.
Well, I think there are some things on this that I thought were either guitar or like a keytar that were actually saxophone. I think, and I like those. There are some parts of this where it sounds like bagpipes. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, they're doing a lot of like effects on the sax. They're using it in a lot of different
could
ways.
Have been you can also, you could do it with an effect. You can do it with just weird playing to a degree. But so I think there are some parts of this where I'm fine with it. I mean, but I think it is a difficult proposition for me in metal. Like, you have to find specifically metal ways of playing the saxophone. I feel like Meslam Teya did a good job of that, where they got the saxophone was influenced by like actual kind of free jazz playing and whatnot. Right? This to me, I mean, I understand. The aesthetic now makes more sense to me. It's like, okay, 70s prog, synthwave, or 80s movie soundtrack. I get it, but like, I just can't stand that sort of smooth jazz saxophone sound, and I can't stand how soulful he's trying to make it. It's like it's like Kenny G. And I get that it's a vibe, but for me, and I get that this is supposed to be somehow futuristic, but like, it's also, to some extent, like that the saxophone supplies all the drama there. That's like the exciting part, right? The initial melodic BM riff is, as you pointed out in the notes, one of the better ones on the record, but pretty underwhelming. And if you've heard some descending minor arpeggio things before, and then the sax comes in. Yeah, God, I don't like the tone. I don't like the style. Also, just for listeners, full disclosure, I used to play saxophone. But not like super seriously. I stopped when I was a teenager and realized I liked dumb music instead of smart music.
I think that is an important thing to lay out up front. Riff to riff, this is not great. Like, there's not a lot of memorable riffs on this record. But I say that with the caveat that I do not believe this is supposed to be riff-oriented. I think that you really hit on something in the notes where you talked about summoning gets better when you listen to it as sort of like ambient atmospheric music or something like that. And I think this does also.
Yeah, I feel like in some sense the overall goal of what they're trying to do, which is use black metal technique to make this kind of crazy future fantasy ambient atmospheric soundtrack experience with about bone praying mantises and trees of eternal death, like I fully approve of all that, right? But yeah, for me I feel like, so I guess what I said in the notes is like, when I hear a thing that doesn't really have, when I hear like a band like this where there like aren't really very strong riffs in it, I think like what I do is like I try to think first like, well, what could they be trying to do, right? And especially like these guys, if you look at the lineup, like I know some of these names, or at least I've seen them, right? Like, or like Merrimack, that was big when we were like much younger. Born, I've heard of, like the guy Bornihak, I've heard of his name. These are like, you know, they're like dudes, Belenos, right? These are dudes on the French BM scene. They know what, you know, like, they know what like a solid black metal riff sounds like, right?
Yeah.
And so they're doing this for a reason. And they're definitely trying to de-emphasize the riffs themselves. It's like something like they want to de-emphasize the riffs themselves in favor of the arrangements and the textures.
Mm-hmm.
However, my thing is like I often just don't find the arrangements or textures that compelling. And on the other hand, I feel like it does depend on riffs more than it wants to, because like a lot of the layer, aside from the big sax breaks, a lot of the arrangement stuff is just kind of stacking fifths and octaves on the original riff, which is like not necessarily bad if what you're doing originally is highly riffy or melodic or something, but like to me it all like you know that there's this kind of smoothness that is not my thing in music. This is very smooth.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that like I don't disagree really with anything you're saying. I think that. And I think that a lot of the issues that I have with this album are basically the same as yours. I think that the only difference is really that, like, I appreciate the conceit of it so much.
I get what you mean. It's just like you have more. I think we also both exactly agree on what they should do to develop it. So, like, yeah, it's basically just you have more time for this.
Exactly. Yeah, I've got more patience for this. I have such a love of just weirdness in general that I mean, we both probably agree that, like, a failed experiment is better than mediocre competency, but I think that I'm just way further in that direction.
Yeah, and also just, like, this is drawing on genres I'm basically committed to hating. Right, like I mean,
yeah.
I don't like 70s prog. Sorry, I mean, even though I'm sure some of it's good, I'm sure I'd like some of it now. Sorry, punk dogma. Don't like 70s prog. Hate synthwave. So like, it's just those things are. Although I love the themes, those things are right out for me. But like, let's try. Here's a section that has like a lot of the eccentricity here. And it's kind of, I would just describe this as like, a lot of this record has this kind of smoothly flowing, just spacey, epic adventure atmosphere. This is kind of like a very active section where the harmonies, the arrangement starts. I feel like the arrangement starts to pay off here more.
Okay.
There's a lot of like active interaction between these different layers. So this is from the end of The Long Goodbye.
Yeah, you're correct. That's one of the more dynamic sections of this record.
Yeah, it just feels like there's a little more in the different layers. There's a lot of layers throughout this, and often the layers just kind of sit alongside each other. But here they all start like playing, you know. So like as far as like the more solid riffs on this, this has got actually this is the same kind of phrase as the same basic stock folky black metal phrase as the Toke riff that we both really liked on the last record.
Yeah.
But this is more like kind of a just like it's got that do 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 do, and then it does some jigs around a little at the end. But that reminds me of just like sort of like a perfect, just the root notes of a perfectly serviceable later Graveland riff. But like that's probably my favorite regular BM riff on this, but it's pretty not, it's like B+. This is, but like when it's interacting with those synth layers, right? Then that kind of, those little sort of pulsed 80s electro kind of things, right?
Oh, I love those things.
Yeah, you start to get a little more like a dance beat. Too. Yeah, it's, I can't say that I think all of... Yeah, I don't know that I find all of this tasteful, but it's certainly there's like engaging music happening there.
Oh, the tastelessness is part of the appeal to me.
I understand. If it all sounded like that, I'd probably like the whole thing better. No.
I like how blisteringly uncool this music is. But
yeah, it's... I did kind of like the metalcore part too, like the at the end. Like I liked that they were doing that kind of. Again, who knows what it actually is, right? That is one interesting thing about this band is weird sounds being made in unexpected ways. But a thing that sounds like a violin over it gets one of the only sort of suggestions of dissonance on the record.
Yeah, well, I mean that's an interesting thing in general. Is just the sort of. It's one of those things where buying into the conceit is helpful because this record has a very sort of flattened melodic palette.
Yes.
But in a way that I kind of like when I'm just like... When I'm listening to it in the way that I believe it should be listened to, which is like, alright, we're just setting this on fucking cruise control for the stars. There's just going to be kind of weird shit going on. There's going to be some stuff that looks like it's from a Frank Frazetta painting, but with robots and shit. it's I don't know. I can kind of get into just how kind of flat and expansive this stuff is. This music sounds more like a landscape than a narrative, I would say.
Yeah, tonally. I mean, yeah, you also just like tonalities like this better than me. I feel like when I complain about stuff that sounds sort of like generically open minor, like just kind of like, sure, it's a minor scale and there's this kind of, it's... The melodies are like written on a grid. And
I
got kind of it doesn't particularly feel minor, doesn't particularly feel major. Like, there are examples of good post rock that use that deliberately, or like Brian Eno's music for airports has things like that, right? But like hearing, it just doesn't like hearing sort of post rocky versions of riffs I like is not, that's kind of like, oh my God, what did you do to him? Graveland, speak to me. It's
it's funny because a lot of the things you keep saying are like they add to just the whole thing going on here, which is like, oh yeah, Brian Eno's music for airports. I fucking love that.
But this doesn't sound like music for airports. I mean, it's.
Well, no, I get it, but
I guess it does sort of. I mean, via your prog interpretation, it does sort of sound like something from that era.
Yeah, I think that the heart of this, I feel like the heart of this is outside metal. Really,
I agree.
I think that just these guys are practiced black metal musicians. That's a platform that they're comfortable with starting with. But I think that, because I was thinking while we listened to it, it's like, would this be different or better if it was just clean vocals, or if it was just maybe even just instrumental music?
Yeah, probably. I think, yes. I think the thing that are most distinctive about this band, and that they are, again, this is just in this particular configuration, the things they're doing best and seem most interested in are the non-metal things.
Yeah. But now let's get to our last couplet of samples, because these are both off the same track, which is usually an important sign for a record where this is the most interesting one. Because I had some notes on this one, which was talking about the album in a kind of a meta sense, where I was saying, if you take this music and you strip it of its maximalism, you take away the tremolo riffs and you take away the double kicks, and you just let that negative space ring, a lot of what it ends up sounding like, to me in particular, is like the first Skepticism record, Stormcrow.
Triggered!
Hey, listen, I've listened to that album probably exactly as many times as you have, dude. So, but like, so let's listen to this sample here. This is a little bit later than your sample, but this is my
we'll start with
yours. Yeah. It's towards the end of the track, and imagine this without the space filled in, and tell me what you think. can't believe that my space wife has alien cancer.
Bro, I'm so sorry. We should never have gone to that planet.
We should have never gone to that planet. Everything just ended up worse.
I had a bad feeling from the start.
when we pierced through the atmosphere and we saw the skeleton warriors with swords around, I had an idea that maybe this mission wasn't as safe as Command said. Ah, shit. I really like this song.
He's the death metal guy was poisoned by the atmosphere.
Yeah, that's what happened. Yeah, just sucking in all that Venusian fucking ammonia or whatever. So I really like this song. I think this song is closer to what these guys should be doing, because they kind of abandon all pretense of black metal here.
Yeah, although also the guitar work is way more engaging than it is, like... A lot of the guitar things are things that you could do on a particularly kind of power metal-y, kind of fantasy black metal record. But, like, yeah, no, I mean, like, I think this is definitely, like, yeah, big climax moment. This is the last track, right? Or is it the second to last?
Second to last, yeah.
Yeah, no, we both sampled this. I think we agree it's the strongest. Definitely arrangement. It doesn't really progress like a metal song. But, like, you know, the idea of, like, those sort of... The skepticism thing you're thinking of is those kind of big, kind of interestingly shaped big descending chords at the beginning, right?
Yeah, there's something very specific about these chord shapes. I'm not sure what they are, but they are something that's kind of unique to skepticism.
It's, there's, like... I think there's, like, a lot of fourths there, which is, like... Doing kind of heavy-sounding fourth stuff is one of the cooler things you can do with an open tonality like this. Also, juxtaposed with, like, I like the Angus Young guitar over that.
Oh, right? Yeah. The weird sort of, like, Celtic phrase that sneaks in there in this otherwise...
Yeah, that's kind of shredding over the top. That's another thing I like. I mean, this is just, of course, I'm a sucker for this, but there's a lot of stuff on this record that sounds like bagpipes being produced by instruments that are not bagpipes. Yeah. And all those kinds of things with weird trills or built-in harmonic effects, I think are very cool, and I think this band could do more.
Yeah, but, and the reason it works so well is because it's not bothering to shape it like a black metal riff.
Sure, yeah, that's a good example of that's a good example of, like, we've got this big chord progression and we've got just some shred, right?
Yeah, no, and I think that we both agree that the path forward for this band really doesn't have much to do with black metal. Like, my idea was, like, we can already tell that the riffs are not the important part here, so let's strip those down even further. Let's make them even more minimal. Let's really punch up, like, the electronic elements and just make weird desert planet music,
Yeah, could they make the guitars just more chord progression-y?
Yeah, like,
because when they're playing riffs, the implied chord structures and harmonies are just bland. But when they're just playing chords, I mean, I don't really think that is the density of skepticism, but I hear what you mean. They're, like, cool, kind of majestic sounding clank, chords. If they did, and it's kind of, simple but heavy, if they did stuff like that throughout, right? That would be a just solid harmonic bass for doing whatever kind of epic flights of fancy they want to do over that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, so as far as, connections to skepticism or whatever, I suppose, I feel like it's mostly on this song where that is a thing. But I take your point that on this song I can hear what you mean. Let's go here. I mean, here's the part that hit me on this record. I like this part a lot, and of course, it's obvious why I like this part. But Yeah, this is just a cool climactic moment. Earlier in this... Actually, that's a distinctive thing about this song, is that this track has cool climactic moments at multiple places in it.
Yeah.
So this is the early song climax of The Last Pilgrims.
Yeah, that's a cool part.
That's great. I mean, yeah, that's like my favorite part of the record.
It's the closest to a kind of classic medieval melody.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is the connection with skepticism, is that, like, on this, skepticism clearly probably spent a lot of time listening to medieval music. These guys are probably familiar with it. You know, they're like black metal dudes from France, right? Yeah, I feel like there's this... When these guys reach into that medieval harmonic vocabulary, it just sounds cool. It gives the riffs the kind of... It shifts the tonality from the earlier stuff, and suddenly there's a lot more muscle in the melodies and the riffs, the harmonies.
Yeah, I can see that. I think that... I mean, that really kind of brings us back to us originally talking about summoning, you know? What makes summoning compelling is the way it just sounds like they're unearthing these incredibly simple, sort of instinctual musical ideas.
Yeah,
you know?
This sort of horns at the castle gates.
And the fact that, and also part of what makes it compelling is the fact that they're doing it on these kind of cheap synths. You know, they're not bothering to brush the dust off the bones when they uncover it. You know.
Yeah. So like this is exactly. So I mean, to me, like the funny thing is like this to me is the most black metal part on the record, and it actually you could hear it sounds like a French black metal band. Suddenly, like I mean, you could hear this on an Our Lock or Vehemence record. But it's slow. I feel like maybe as far as the heavier or more metal parts, maybe this band just... maybe because they need space for those dense arrangements, maybe just working at slower tempos for these heavy parts works better for them. Like if if they're gonna do something overtly metal, this works. And also you could hear their proggy thing just in the way they then bump that melody up like a fourth or fifth and do it like there's like a chord change or a key change or something there that like extends the melodic idea that like a regular black metal band probably wouldn't do, right?
Yeah. No, I think this is a case where, excuse me, this is a record with, I believe, all the constituent parts of something that can be great. They just don't know how to put them together yet. Because there's something to be uncovered here. You've got this epic but kind of desolate, like, desert planet atmosphere. You've got these sort of, like, densely chorded arrangements that are happening in fits and starts. You've got this... you've got, like, the really, synth-wavy kind of 80s electronic stuff going on. I can definitely imagine that all being put together on a second record, and then kind of jettisoning the black metal riffing stuff that feels like a holdover,
Yes.
It feels like, for lack of knowing exactly what to do in terms of guitar stuff, we're going to do kind of like traditional melodic black metal stuff, but stripped down and sort of softened and in the background, when really I think they should just step away from that completely and just make weird fucking paysage de hiver on Tatooine shit,
Yeah, I kind of agree. It will probably end up sounding more black metal the fewer black metal riffs are in it.
It probably will. Yeah.
Like I think, more skepticism, more summoning, and I think we'd both agree more electronic stuff, and maybe more even, like, the parts where the drums, I think they do have live drums here, but the parts where the drummer are doing sort of preposterous electronic style dense double bass fills, those are cool. Those are heavy, right? Shit like that, it's throwing some fucking disco beats.
Yeah, fuck it. Why not? I think that's the main advice for the band is, like, you really don't have to be a black metal band.
Yeah, follow your bliss, dudes. Do it.
Yeah. It's like, your vibe is your tribe, bro. And your vibe is, like, wandering through the canyons of the desert planet.
Yeah, and if they go for that,
praying mantis after you,
Yeah, and if they go for that, maybe I'll buy the saxophone,
All right. Let's see. What's some good weird desert music as an interlude?
Oh God, desert music. Thinking of stuff like this. I don't know about desert music, but one thing this did specifically remind me of was the later Sear Bliss stuff.
Oh, yeah. Well, Sear Bliss is always welcome on this show.
Yeah. No, we both like that. So, like, I mean, I feel like the last Sear Bliss record was kind of reaching for this band. One thing I do like about Soul Draconi, also I like the Dragon Sun name, that's cool. But like, one thing I like about them is that it's very cool wizard music, right? Yeah. And like, I feel like a definitive sort of cool wizard music thing that I think, sticks the landing a little better is Sear Bliss's Letters from the Edge, which is like, it's still metal, but it's very proximate to like pop forms of metal and like electronica. But it's like cool fantasy, cool swords and planets, portal hopping wizard shit. Let's see give me a sec to choose a track. But yeah, this is from 2018. And you're a big fan of their I think I approve of their older work, but you know it really well, right?
Yeah, like the first few records are the ones that I'm best acquainted with. I need to go through the whole discography at one point, though.
Wait, actually, there's a similar track title on this, even. Soul Draconi Septem. What are the tracks on this again? The River Letha's Taste is Bitter. In fact, on Sear Bliss's Letters from the Edge, we've got At the Banks of Letha. Is it
all right. Well, there we go. Then that's the one we got to play, right?
It's really short, sadly. It's an interlude. Here's the one I want. This is another great title. A Mirror in the Forest by Sear Bliss from Letters from the Edge.
All right, we're back after Sear Bliss with the Debut full-length by Zatrata. It's self-titled. This is a Polish band who do kind of a crusty death grind. So I talked about the Polish and Czech grind scenes a little bit way early on in the history of the show. And something that's always been interesting to me, especially after kind of learning more about crust with you, is that it feels like the point of adjacency for crust and metal nowadays in like Western Europe and North America is basically crust and black metal. But over in Eastern Europe, for many years now, it's always been more adjacent to the death and grind scenes. Now, obviously,
a healthier state of affairs.
Probably, yeah. So, especially in Poland and Czechia, there's always been a lot of bands that flirted with both sides of the equation. And you can also see that on, festivals like Obscene Extreme out in Czechia, where...
I think it's Czechia.
Czechia? Yeah.
Still
the Czech Republic.
We're not Chechens.
Right. Yeah, but like you see a festival like Obscene Extreme, and it is a combination of gore grind bands and brutal death bands and like old school grindcore stuff, and then kind of crusty mixtures of any of those things, which is interesting. There isn't really an equivalent to that in North America, unless you want to go back to I don't know, like Weekend Nachos or something like that. You remember that band?
There was a fair amount of stuff like Weekend Nachos, but like, I would say like crusty death metal probably, or like, no, I mean, there is a lot of crusty death metal overlap. I just think it's in a different way. Like in the US, it's probably like more by Bolt Thrower or Swedish bands, right?
Yeah.
The good crusty death metal sounds like Bolt Thrower. The bad crusty death metal sounds like Entombed. And in Eastern Europe, it seems like there's more vital. And also, usually those are the most boring provinces of crust being combined with those genres. Whereas in Eastern Europe, it sounds like there's things that aren't in touch with them as much in the West, like sort of like real sort of nasty gutter crust, extreme grindcore, often sounding more gory than the crusty equivalent in the West, and like proper death metal. Right, sort of combining in ways that are... The Czech stuff is certainly like that, too. Where it's just like... It just sounds more extreme. Right? It does. I think in the last... At least in the last 10 years, they're sort of like... There's just been this sort of like... This sort of generic trucker hat bro metal, right? They call it crusty death metal. And what does it mean? Well, it means it's the new equivalent of grunge.
Yeah, and I mean, what does that even mean? It's just old school death metal with D beats. Well, old school death metal already had D beats, so
exactly, yeah.
I mean,
no, it's just old school death metal played by guys from the hardcore scene who, exactly,
yeah. Well, so in terms of this record specifically, how does this scan for you? Since you're obviously way more involved in crust than I've ever been.
Yeah, this is quite good. What I wrote in my notes. And, in some sense, it's very similar in some ways to this crust extreme metal synthesis thing that was happening in the US like 10 years ago and has continued. But from a different culture and with different base ingredients, and it's more compelling than 99% of it, at least as far as I remember. The thing I can think of it that's most proximate to, and this is just, I don't think this is like the best reference point for this, right? This is just a record that's important to me. It's just the first All Pigs Must Die EP, which was the basic format would just be metallic hardcore, but basically all the riffs going into the blender are from sort of like D-beat and war metal and stuff, and some integrity kind of stuff, and death metal, and they just sort of they just throw it all in a blender, but it's not pastiche because it's at the level of structure. The songs have just this very focused, continued intent, and they're just like really intense 15-minute, just get in, get out operation. And this is kind of like that, I think, but like instead of coming from, you know, more like hardcore dudes, it's coming more from the, you know, crust, grindcore. Grind is a real ingredient in this, right?
Yeah, like a meaningful ingredient. It's not just blast beats, there's actual grind stuff, you know.
Exactly. Actual grind stuff, actual death metal riffing, signals familiarity with death. There is a fair amount of Swedish sounding stuff in this, but it signals familiarity with things other than like a couple chug riffs on Left Hand Path. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Although I'd say that the bolt thrower is a big ingredient here too.
Oh, for sure. No, you're right. You're right. Yeah. Yes.
And one thing that's interesting, because you wrote in your notes, was stuff like Disrupt, which was... I didn't think of that at first, but I'm actually a huge fan of the Disrupt record. And that is a very interesting touchstone of, like, crust blending with extreme metal in kind of an odd way.
Yeah, that's a good example of what I mean by sort of, like, classic, really nasty raw crust as opposed to arena crust. Is like Disrupt versus whatever kind of, you know, trucker hat band you want, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I went back and listened to that Disrupt record today after I thought of that, and I was like, damn, this is great. I think that's one of those things that was like... record. I think I listened to it a lot when I was younger and then just totally forgot about it. Yeah.
No, same. That was like when I was a teenager, I listened to that constantly. It's interesting because I always thought that was way more accessible to me, probably because I was a metal kid, than a lot of the other crust stuff that I'd heard at the same time.
It's also just high quality.
Oh yeah, it's just really good. Vocals are fucking awesome. So let me do a quick track off this. It's pretty easy because most of the songs here are very short. This is 10 tracks in 20 minutes. So let's listen to, just starting the second half of the record, a song called Fundamenti Viare. Yeah, I'd say that's a track that is just like completely satisfying. You know,
Yeah,
it's
that's
like,
awesome, man.
This is exactly what this kind of thing is supposed to be. You got the huge bolt thrower stuff opening up. It's very like Fourth Crusade or War Master. Then you got the really fun, cool D beat part. You got to do the D beat rush with the sustained chord.
Yeah,
it
and
never gets old.
it's not a throwaway D beat riff. It's like good. They're using that kind of more. It's Swedish, so you relying more on lumbering tone and slower picking, or less rapid picking than some British stuff or whatever. But it's than like Discharge. But it is. They get the heaviness from good choice of intervals and clever timing, where to change.
Yeah,
it.
And then they tie it together with that kind of like thrashy, almost melodeath break. You said it was very much like Angel of Death.
Pretty much just straight Slayer. Yep.
Yeah. But then like the intervals are a little bit different, so it gives you a little bit of that Swedish melodeath or a little bit of like a Dysphere feel or something at that moment.
Sure.
And then
everyone's allowed to use a few Slayer riffs on every record, right?
Yeah, that is true. That is true. And then it wraps it up. It just blows it out, and you're done. You're in and out in 2 minutes, and it's really fun all the way through.
There was that sort of crisp kind of. There was a riff at the end. The joke is, we can go through and like source all these riffs, right? And that's kind of the point. That's the fun of it. But like at the end, there was a pretty cool sort of like death metal riff of a fairly unique construction, very crisp chugging with some leads over it. Can you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I remember the one you were talking about, but it's like it's nested amongst everything else.
Yeah.
So it gets kind of hard to pick out. Like, I think there's a lot of subtleties on this record. Like, just listening to it again, I'm like, holy shit, that's a really good bass tone. That's a really gnarly fucking bulldozer bass tone they have. But this is kind of what you see is what you get in music at the same time. It's like, oh, I like all of these parts. I like when they're all assembled in a logical way into a very fun 2-minute crust death metal song. It's like, yeah.
This is a really good put on with your buddies while you're drinking kind of thing. And then you hear that riff and you say, wait, did you hear that riff, bro? And then you go back and listen to the riff and then you keep going or whatever, right?
Yeah,
You play it over again after the record finishes. But like, there's just, this isn't about the right attention span for chilling.
Yeah. I think I like that it's simple enough to be like a very like easy listen, but it's complex enough to be worth seriously listening to as well. And I mean, honestly, one of the things I was thinking of, just like, especially during that big D-beat riff they were doing, it's like, oh, maybe this is just what crust sounds like when guys can play their instruments.
Well, also just when they can write crust riffs. It's like, I tell you, I'm picky about it, right? These guys can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I was comparing it to like kind of a Martyrdod riff that, it's just, it's like plenty of crust riffs you've heard before, but it's like you said, the devil's in the details when it comes to those kinds of riffs.
Exactly, yeah. A band like Martyrdod has good phrasing, and a good crust riff often has like 2 or 3 of these little micro riffs in it, and that one certainly did. But yeah, this is just, it's got momentum throughout. How do you write a crust riff like that without plotting, right? And great built-in momentum. The whole record rips back to front, even when it slows down. Yeah, I think related to what you were saying, my thought is like, I don't know how many. There might be like 10 standout riffs on this record, which is a lot for something that's 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And the average riff quality is A-.
Which is pretty rare for anything
remarkable.
These days.
Pretty rare for anything, especially in a genre that's not known as riff-based music. That's pretty remarkable. But for any band to have like average, on a short release, to have sort of average A- riffs with some big stonkers, it's pretty impressive, right?
Yeah.
Is there a bad riff on this record?
No, there's really nothing bad on this record.
Yeah.
Like, it's just it's just a very good delivery of a kind of niche style that more people should listen to, because God knows, I think we both say we'd rather listen to this than whatever the fucking latest, like, Blackened Crust release that everyone's talking
or the
about
latest
is.
Tombstalker. Yeah.
Is that a real band, or?
Dude, that's real. That's one of the ones they keep trying to flog. Yeah, for like 3 years. I always forget when I'm listening to them. Yeah, so this is, it's like a death metal kind of, grunge death metal. So this is my sample. Basically just one of the great pleasures of a record like this, this style of short, hardcore, full length, or EP, is certain kind of moments that happen between the tracks where it's less like, oh, this is good pacing, this follows really well from the other one, and more like you have a riff-to-riff change-up happening from one track to the next.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, here we go from the end of Oslepione oh, I can't do that one, into Topor.
Yeah, that is really nicely paced, that transition.
Yeah, I was telling the death metal guy, I was listening to this while I was taking a shit, and then when that hit, I just started headbanging. Toilet. Like, damn, that's heavy.
Yeah.
It's yeah, no, that's a yeah, with the switch to the 6/8 is really cool. And like you could start the track right there on the 6/8 and then be like, okay, here's a big 6/8 riff, but it's so much heavier if you listen to the track before.
Oh yeah, and it's like there's a couple moments across this record where songs just flow into each other. Like at the end of my sample, that leads directly into the next one. They just, I think they recorded it sort of live in just like a few sessions and like cranking out a few songs at a time, something like that. I mean, honestly, there's not a lot to say about it. It's just a really well executed record, and there's, you know, and the thing is, there's so many bands kind of in this vein all around Czechia and Poland, and they never really break out of the Eastern European scene. I mean, there's stuff like FAM, there's Neuropathia, who are a little bit more on the death metal side. There's Utopia, who are great and a little bit more grindy. Even stuff not necessarily from that scene, like a band like Catheter would probably fall into the same category, or WTN, or from Singapore. Yeah, no, just there's a lot of great music in this niche, but, you know, it's like, it's always a little too crust for the death metal guys, a little too death metal for the crust guys, but if you listen to it, I mean, it basically speaks for itself.
Yeah, no, I like this a lot. I'd say my one note of, I mean, yeah, we basically can't find anything to criticize about this. My one note of constructive criticism would be like, why not have exactly this same record but with a rawer production?
I would agree with that. There is something like, it's a little smooth and a little quiet.
Yeah. Yes.
It's
yes.
Oddly quiet.
It sounds
it's very
like Arena
recording.
Crust.
Yeah, even though it's like much more aggressive and abrasive than that is.
Yeah, the playing is really aggressive. The songwriting is really aggressive, but the guitar tone in particular is polished, smooth, chunky MIDI. Right?
Yeah.
Like
it's a little strange.
Yeah, I would put the guitar, turn it all up, put the vocals a little more forward, put it in the red, man. Like, I mean, like, just something with, like, in some sense to me, like, the difference between, like, real crust and arena crust is just, does it have feedback?
Oh, yeah, this needs some feedback on it.
This needs some feedback, white noise. It doesn't have to sound like, I get that they want to have, like, big sound, but okay, just it doesn't have to sound like tinny, right? But you could do a version of this. I mean, if you heard them play this, like, they're not going to re-record it, but my God, they should just do a live recording of this record, right? I'd probably more.
I bet live, just pushed way into the red.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Oh no, I forgot to pick up earplugs at Walmart. I guess I'm fucked for the next week, kind of thing. There you go. That's the way to hear this music.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'd love to hear this band live, and if they should just do a live recording of this, because they could play this whole thing through, and it would be great. But either way, we'll both probably listen to this again. This is just super fun.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. So, very good record. We'll take a quick break, and we'll get to our final album of the night.
How's it going? Connor here from Oncology, and you're listening to Terminus.
All right, we're back with our final record of the night. Exsanguinate's Violence is the Natural Law. We got a patron here, and you're the one who does all the talking to people, so what have we got?
All right, well, you do a lot of talking on the Discord, but
You're the outward-facing member of Terminus.
Oh, yeah, I'm exoteric Terminus. Yes, I'm the smiling face. You're the soul-devouring cult leader. But yeah, so this guy, this guy sent us his demo. His alias is CJ. He's from Boulder, Colorado. It's not a demo, sorry. This guy sent us his like work, his work. It's a one-man project. And I think he's in the stages of developing it, like everything on this episode, except maybe the Crust record, which just kind of was what it was, right? This is a project that's coalescing, I think, but it is damn promising and cool. Right?
Yeah, it's very interesting music.
Yeah, this is going somewhere. So he sent me the best press release you could do, which is just influences include Negative Plane, Varathron, Stargazer, Inquisition, Early Rotting Christ, Rites of Thy Degringolade, Grand Belial's Key, and the lyrics are generally themed around potential ways I think humanity could end itself, free will, and our treatment of non-human life. You read that and you instantly have some idea of how it sounds, right?
Yeah, which is interesting because it's like that. I wouldn't say that it really sounds that much like any of those. I mean, I can definitely see them.
A lot.
You think so?
Yeah. I mean, but it doesn't sound like. But like those bands also. I think the thing he did really well is he picked up on a kind of. One of those kind of lateral. Those are all. A lot of these are seen as in different genres, right? Or different subgenres. But he picked up on those kind of lateral idea or tonality level connections between them.
I gotcha.
I mean, I guess I don't hear a lot of Rites of Thy Degringolade in particular, or like a lot of like rock and rollin' GBK riffs per se. But I think I can hear it. It's
so this is difficult music to describe. I mean, it's
that's true.
I mean, it's black metal, He describes it as black death. I don't really hear that much death metal in it. I see it as more like abstract black metal. But there's a big chunk of thrash in it, but not really implemented in the way that you would think. Actually, probably the closest thing that this is to that we've covered on the show before would be a much less heavy metal take on Mongrel's Cross.
Yeah, so that's really the niche this is in, and that's what connects all those bands that he listed. That's why he calls it Black Death, is that it's this kind of, it is this niche that I'm into, and I guess just throwing more of at you on this show, which you could call black war metal, thrashing war metal, like arrogant thrash, I've been calling it, or people call it intolerant death metal. Like, these are all... terms. It's just this family of somewhat related bands, right? The Australian bands, the American bands that branch off from GBK, they all listen to the Greek bands. Rights, or like you could, tangentially connected would be Rights or fucking Axis of Advance. But like Inquisition fits in with this. But like they all have this kind of, it's like using, it's a very, in some ways it's a good example of a mannered sound, I was thinking, because it's taking a base of thrash and sort of like exaggerating and working certain parts of the sound to produce kind of black metal feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And like, not black metal in the sense of blackened thrash feelings. And some of it works by... certainly Mongrel's Cross. Certainly, also you could hear on that early Stargazer even how that had that kind of anti-heaviness.
Yeah,
like it's working. It can be heavy in its own way, but it's not trying to thrash in the way that thrash metal does. Right? There's like the mood has something to do with. I think it's sort of like composed masculine confidence. A lot of these bands.
Yeah.
And this is something like getting at something like that and using this kind of thrashy style of riffing to produce this music. But it also sounds, and this wouldn't necessarily be suggested by any of those, except maybe GBK, it also sounds extremely American West, right?
Well, that's interesting, because I think that's a point of... debate, because I think you see this as being a part of the outlaw rock lineage we've been talking about, whereas I have a little bit more trouble slotting it in like that. At the very least, it's an extremely different take on it.
Yeah, no, for sure, it is very different, which is, I guess I find interesting. There's like, but in part, part of that, okay, I could be primed for that, but I feel like that's fair game because visuals are a part of, they're a part of a band, right? If you listen to certain genres of music like dungeon synth or like Dominic Furnow projects, the visuals is all you have to distinguish them, right? But like the visuals here are he just takes these plain color photographs of these just desolate blue-skied high plains landscapes, right? He's from Boulder. And it just like broken down houses, dead trees. And it has this, he seems obsessed with this kind of post-apocalyptic vibe. So kind of like, black metal via Cormac McCarthy and Fallout. Right?
Well, those are three things that I love in one place. So I guess I can't knock that. Let's do a sample. Because I think we're of pretty similar minds about like the strengths and weaknesses of this music.
Yeah.
But it's definitely gotta get the ball rolling just so people know essentially what this sounds like. So
fair enough.
This is from Smoke Rises from the West. And this is gonna be like the first half of this track. It's one of the shorter ones on the record. And this is where it started to pick up speed for me, and I started to it started to grab my ear. I'm like, okay, I think I see what we're getting at here. So let's just listen to the first couple minutes of this, and we'll talk about it.
All right, here we go.
So it's very small, but the thing that grabbed me is the constant repetition of that just like flanged guitar note at the end. It almost sounds like a steel guitar twang. Mm-hmm. That he just peels off at the end of every repetition of the riff. And he does it a couple different ways, but it's this constant recurring motif, and then the reverb from it cuts across the beginning of the next riff for a long time. And I was like...
Yeah, there's a lot of, like, interesting use of reverb, cutting across and stuff.
Well, there's a lot of overdubs happening. There's... Because that's just that flanged, like, twang. I'm pretty sure that's on, like, like its own channel. It's not part of the riff under it. He's just adding it over. And that's something he's doing a lot. This is super layered and textural music from a guitar standpoint. I'm pretty sure there's points on this record where there's like 4 distinct guitar lines going on at the same time.
There was, and there was some really good layering over that. There's like probably like, sure, the main riff changes, but there are all sorts of different harmonic ideas that come in over them, some of which I was really into.
Oh yeah, he's constantly, he's always modifying the harmony a little bit. He's adding and dropping things constantly. Even if the same basic figure is repeating, there's basically a new adjustment on the fly every single time, which is a very interesting way to compose black metal guitars.
Yeah, he's really good at finding space that was there, especially if you take kind of a, like, I don't know, if you try to take a kind of open or musical approach to black metal, space that was always there, but that a certain kind of riff songwriting doesn't notice. And, like, so pursuant to what you were saying about, like, overlap, right? I think that's a good way of putting it. I hadn't put my finger on that. Like, there are lots of ways where, like, because he's using all these overdubs, there will be one riff will literally continue over the beginning of the next one, right?
Yeah, there's like very
that's
strange
not something people usually. Yeah, that's not something people usually do, and that's a really cool idea.
Well, honestly, it's funny because we were talking about the we were talking about the influences that he listed. Because honestly, what this actually reminds me of more than anything is probably like the first Serpent Column record.
Well, the first Serpent Column record definitely sort of fits in this general sort of martial-sounding black thrash thing. I don't really hear the overall similarity. You'd have to explain a little more. Maybe some of the songs at the beginning of the record.
Well, I think it's sort of a meta thing. Serpent Column, especially the old stuff, has this quality where it feels like the riffs are sort of like tumbling over one another.
Oh, you might be thinking of Invicta.
I may be thinking of Invicta more
with the sort of glistening guitar tones, and everything's kind of overlapping, and it still kind of has this thrashing quality to it, but it's kind of submerged.
I think I might be thinking more of Invicta. You're right.
Yeah, no, because there I hear what you mean.
Yeah, it's so I have a feeling this guy probably listens to a lot of Serpent Column. There's also in the way that this guy programs his drums, because like Serpent Column drumming tends to. Yeah,
it closely follows the riffs, right?
Yeah, Serpent Column drumming is much more like an accompaniment to the riffs, and this is kind of the same way. The programming is very, excuse me, it's very like bespoke. To the like individual riff or the individual phrase, and I can kind of go off and on with that because I think there's parts of this record where it works really well, and then there's other parts where it's a little bit too much going on, I think, and it kind of breaks apart the thread for your ear. But yeah, no, I would say that the fundamental unit of this record is not necessarily the song, but sort of micro songs that get stacked on top of each other. Like that sample that I played off Smoke Rise from the West. The song is kind of in 2 halves. Like what I played was the first half, and it's kind of its own unit.
That's true. Yeah, so hearing this because it's so different in kind of mood mood and sort of like harmonies, and just level of phi, right? This is much lower phi. It's interesting hearing this as potentially influenced by Serpent Column, because that would be really cool. You know what I mean? Like, bearing fruit in this rather than in, the various autistic wank lords who hear it as a sort of, math project. Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, I hear what you mean there. I mean, a thing with the overlap also is, I guess here, I'll transition to my next sample. The overlap thing is also very negative plane. Did you ever listen to negative plane back in the day?
A little bit, way back in the day. I think I talked to one of the guys in the band for a while online, and I think I listened to like their first record and basically liked it, but it just wasn't really my thing.
That's kind of how I felt about it. I initially really liked it because it sounded so much truer than most of the other stuff that was coming out around it. But but it also sort of psychedelic quality that wasn't exactly what I was looking for. And you know what it was? It had a style of riffing that was initially extremely impressive, and then on repeat listens I got less enthused by, which is these sort of weebly woobly descending runs, right? Like, right? And it basically sounded like more elaborate versions of the kind of bendy riffs on a Destruction record, right? Was how I understood it back then. And they kind of just... It was a case of like a thing that had some inherent interest being used so much that it kind of... and I'm just talking about the first negative plane, that's all I remember. Being used so much that it kind of loses its impact. And you realize, these aren't riffs, they're just runs.
Yeah.
A cool thing this guy does is that he has ideas like that, but they always have shapes to them. These sort of cascading downward thing. They're much more riffy than what I remember of Negative Plane. But some of the same excesses, which is that at times it can blur, were related to what you were saying, too much going on. At times it can just be kind of... It can, through too many layers at once, or just not quite the right riff form or whatever, it can become a little riffola. Right?
Yeah.
It can lose some of... It can become a little formless at times. But I'd say that's one of the main just... he's a really talented riff writer, so that's just the main built-in limit to the riffing style, I would say. But let's just... So, related to that, then, it's like... This is a hard record to sample because, as you say, it's these kind of micro songs, and because it just sprawls, right? And so at times that can be this related to the hazy diffuseness of it. But when he does it in a concerted way, right? When he's like, I'm going to make this sort of expansive kind of psychedelic post-nuclear desert kind of sound, I think it really hits. So let's go to Violence is the Natural Law, which is the title track, and we'll start at the beginning. And there's just about a cool 2-minute groove at the beginning of this. So that blasting part was cool, but I just really liked the...
Well, yeah, it works like... I mean, it's almost like an elaboration off of the little interlude track, the third track on this record, which is really just kind of a bluegrass guitar piece.
Yeah, I think there are places where he... Yeah, we were talking about the scales. You said in your notes something about a little too much standard Phrygian stuff.
There's a lot... Well, because the thing is, like, the blues scale and the Phrygian scale are remarkably close to each other. It's just like a couple augmentations.
Well... Yeah, the Phrygian being, right, for listeners, like the kind of snake charmer sounding one, right?
Yeah. But, so, the thing is, like, he's doing a lot of stuff where it's like, I can hear... I think he's trying to go for a, like, kind of an Americana, like, desolate Western thing. But then I think he's kind of doing it in Phrygian scales, so it has this strange, like, Middle Eastern quality to it. Instead, it's interesting. Or it's like he hears the scale differently. He's hearing the bluesiest notes of the Phrygian scale, you know?
Well, yeah, I think that can give it a kind of distinct quality. I mean, the Phrygian thing, right, is being used because that is the thrash scale, right?
Yeah.
And using, like, Mongrel's Cross, there was more Phrygian stuff on their first record, but still Mongrel's Cross uses that as the bass thing. Any of these other bands we've talked about use a lot of it. So it's a kind of part of the convention. I think it's fine to use that as the base, but yeah, there are places where he pushes it into more explicitly bluesy or bluegrassy sounding stuff, and it's very powerful. I think Sanguine River.
Moments.
Yeah. Yeah, this is, I didn't sample it, but like the beginning of Sanguine River is great, and it works, has much more kind of like Celtic mountain music feel to it.
Yeah,
so
I get that.
It goes from his other stuff is like Phrygian, emphasizing the pentatonic, so it's like post-nuclear desert Mad Max, and this is much more sort of like Dorian pentatonic, right? Sounds a little more Euro, a little more.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah,
I think the best stuff on this treads around more kind of Appalachian territory.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it's I think certainly I would like to hear more of that. Yeah, I'm fine with the Phrygian stuff, but the weakness of it is that it can be related to the negative plane thing. It can just, too much of that Phrygian riffy stuff can get just a little bit like indistinct.
Yeah.
Unless you're like trying to write thrash songs where you're writing these very clearly defined big riff, big riff, big riff. Right.
Well, speaking of thrash songs, nice.
Oh, yeah.
You got me. Yeah, you set me up and I just laid it into the bucket. Preordained Genocide, the final track of the record that we both sampled. So the thrash quality of this music is most distinct on this track, I would say.
Yeah, this is a thrash song, basically.
This is a thrash song.
It's not a normal thrash song, but it's definitely a thrash song.
Well, I would say that it's a thrash song in the way that, like I was saying, like early Serpent Column. A lot of those are basically thrash songs. You know, they're very complex thrash songs, and especially when you hear the much more complex sort of staggered rhythmic stuff that happens on this track, that also led me to Serpent Column a lot. It's like, oh, this is how Serpent Column would do a more conventional thrash idea and then kind of turn it on its head by playing with the rhythmic dimension so much. But this is a really good track. So let's check out a couple minutes from a little bit earlier in the track, and then you're on later. So let's just see what we hear.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah, you see, that's a place where the Phrygian thing really works for me.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's more like, yeah, it might be that the spacey stuff. Yeah, I mean, the spacey stuff was Phrygian there, but like it might be that on average, more of the bluegrassy feel and more of the spacey stuff, and then when you're thrashing, you could use the thrash scale.
Yeah. But does that make it a little clearer that serpent column comparison?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I get it. I think I've heard you on that the whole time.
Okay.
There are, yeah, I mean, it also just sounds like Creator, which is like,
well, much more complicated Creator, but yeah.
Yeah, which is the thing I like. I guess it's definitely got a different energy from from the first Serpent Column record. But I hear what you mean. Yeah, no, I get that. He's basically like, when we get to this track, the kind of feeling I have was like, bro, you've been holding out on us.
Well, I think there's this is a record where it's kind of like, what one of the problems is the surplus of riches, because there's a lot of dramatically different moods that this guy's operating in. And I think that there's an effort to make a sort of narrative arc for the whole thing. But I think that it's like the most distant points on the constellation of this record are just like a little bit too distant, if you know what I mean. I think they're all individually very cool ideas. You got, the kind of arrogant thrash stuff. You've got this really soulful kind of bluegrass stuff. And then you have these very sort of abstract, strangely shaped Phrygian black metal riffs, all of which are cool. But I think he's still working on a way to synthesize all those things in an ideal way.
Yeah, I guess yeah, sure. I think like the overall weakness of this structurally is that it's a little bit diffuse. I think I agree. You can even hear that in terms of song structure. So like certain songs, like once you get to the, he's got these different, even in A Lot of Violence is the Natural Law, or some of these middle tracks, it will just phase between the more spacey stuff and the more thrashy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there are times when he does that with intention, and it's very effective. But there are other times when it just sort of phases in and out, kind of like when you're, when you're blackout and you're kind of like coming in and out.
Yeah.
Where you hit the bong too hard, right? You've been drinking and you hit the bong, right? And then everything kind of phases in and out. You get these kinds of moments where it's a little neither here nor there. And
yeah,
like,
well, I think that what that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh well, no, I was just gonna say I think that has to do with the like hyper textured nested guitars, because I have a feeling that the way this guy writes music is that he's got a great ear and a great mind for being able to piece together these very intricate kind of melodic ideas, and I think he can kind of construct the harmonic dimension of it on the fly, but I think that comes out fully formed in these sort of micro-song ways where they're all elaborate variations on a central melodic idea. And then the challenge... the challenge is getting between them. So I think that's where you'll hear some of the issues where it's like with the drum machine, he's trying to create something that matches the intensity, but then it's like, how do we get from one part to another? That's the difficult part, which is kind of the standard difficult part for every one-man project, I would say.
Yeah, and especially this, because as you say, part of the novelty, part of the appeal of this band is that he's trying to span these very disparate emotional registers, right?
Yeah.
And it can be really cool sometimes when he's doing these kind of para-thrashing riffs, and there's all this cascading stuff happening around it. It can be very trippy in a cool way. But sometimes, you know, a good example of this is Final Days of the Nuclear Epoch. I feel like there's some active measure to, like, trade between these parts, and then when the thrashing part comes in, it's still got... There's a nicely shaped melody there, and it's still got a lot of the glistening stuff over it, and that's pretty cool. But in other places where it's just oscillating, yeah, not as engaging. So I feel like in some sense he needs to really commit to both halves of the spectrum and then think more about certain specific areas where he's throwing them together and transitioning and things like that.
I think that it's really... I think it's one of those weird things where it's like he's got the hard part done first.
Yes, yes.
He's got this...
That's a similarity to Serpent Column.
Yeah, he's got this, like, insanely intricate mind specifically for these nested kind of guitar layers, and then it's just, like, nuts and bolts shit from there, you know? Agreed. And I think that's a lot harder to do alone than it is when you've got people to bounce ideas off of.
That might be our last annoying piece of advice, which would be get a drummer.
Make it a full band. Yeah.
Yeah. It's probably difficult, I know. It's, make it a full band. Yep. It's, or like, yeah, I don't know how he's doing it, but whatever way you could even try to simulate a full band, right?
Yeah.
But, like, this would sound really... This band obviously wants to have full live tones.
Yeah, and I think that making it more organic like that probably in and of itself could bridge some of the gaps that we're talking about.
Yeah, just having to deal with an ADHD aggro drummer would help avoid some of the head trip excesses. But yeah, so speaking of which, like, basically kind of the funny thing, right? The punchline of this record and the whole review is that although it's this kind of abstract atmospheric thrash thing the whole way through, at the end the guy's just like, yeah, I'm just gonna write like a sick thrash song. And it's the funny thing is it's like, often like when you hear something it's funny because like it's so good. This last song is so good, right? And like, so like more stuff like this, man. So let's go to the end of Preordained Genocide. Yeah, that's just a pretty good example of like what I like about music.
Well, it's still very sword-oriented.
It becomes highly sword-oriented, yes. We go a little... Yeah, my note image for this was it's like the creator guy smashing the skeletons, but he's got a cowboy hat and a wolf tattoo and a battle axe made from a wrench.
No, it's... I mean, it is funny that just, like, he just rips out this, like, giant epic thrash song at the end. It's like exactly what you were saying. It's like, why were you waiting so long to pull this out? Like, here we go.
It's almost like, I mean, the ideas earlier on this record are super interesting. It should be preserved in the project, but, like, given that
this is where the execution is firing on all cylinders.
This song is fucking 8 minutes long, and it has 2 parts in it that are just like, holy shit, man. Like,
yeah.
I mean, like, so there's no reason you couldn't write an album with center of gravity more in this. And, like, maybe it sounds more basic to you or less interesting. You know, now we're just directly addressing him, right? But, like, it's just so damn good. And it has a lot of the weirdness in it, too.
Yeah, no, it's... you can hear he's still infusing some of those really abstract guitar ideas into the riffs there, like those weird chiming harmonics at the end of that, like, really fast Palmuted one.
Kills me, yeah. So he hits that big sort of Dorian, noble, savage, barbarian melody. Dum, 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 dum. And so that, there you get all the mountain, the bluegrass and country thing, right?
Yeah,
you get the sort of folk drone under American music. And, yeah, that chiming guitar over that is so beautiful. Like,
yeah, no, it's this is where everything coalesces completely.
Yes.
It's like, this is it. Yes. It's like, do your bizarre post-apocalyptic Americana thrash. I think that's... And you can fold all those, like, really elaborate abstract guitar ideas into it because you just did it here.
Yes.
And I think that's maybe... I think my opinion's changed a little bit. I think that might be the ideal form for me, for this guy.
No, I think over the course of it's evolved. Yes, it's like, in some sense, the earlier stuff, relative to that, the earlier stuff appears too mannered, too refined. If you can write an album where the center of gravity is shit like this, and then you've got deliberately spacey, droning kind of groove moments in between them, there you go.
Yeah, no, I think we're in agreement on that one.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So basically, this guy is going good places. It's just like, you know, it is just like, bro, just admit to yourself, you love to thrash.
just let the creator and destruction just flow directly through you, and it's all going to be good.
Yes, and gospel of the horns, man. And get a drummer, because the ADHD, once you tell them you've got a blitzkrieg apocalyptic black thrash band, the drummers will come running like the women.
They absolutely will.
All right.
So yeah, very interesting record, and obviously thanks to CJ for the support on the show, and we're looking forward to hearing some new stuff. So yeah, well, to wrap things up, you ever listen to, because I was trying to follow the Western thread. Have you ever listened to the Earth record, Hex, or Printing in the Infernal Method?
I've been meaning to. I read an interview with him long ago where I was just like, this dude is such a G. It was some Pitchfork person talking to him or whatever, and he said something, they asked him about, like, he said something to the effect of, he likes thinking about, something like the pathetic age of reason washing up on the shores of reality. And all the sort of, and sort of like the gods and fairies coming back to the world or something. And I was like, this dude fucking gets it.
Yeah, well, so Hex was their take on a sort of ominous Americana drone. I listened to really old Earth when I was younger, and then my buddy, who's actually the drummer in my band now, is the one who found Hex, and he showed it to me because he's an enormous fan of Westerns in general, and kind of Western music. And he showed it to me, and yeah, no, this really is a wonderful, very singular thing. You know, it's got all the weirdness of Jandek, but it's also very heavy. It is a circa 1895 mugshot in musical form, you know, for horse thievery, you know, horse thievery and sodomy. So we'll go out with a track.
And let's just say both of those charges are more closely related than you might think.
Deeply interrelated charges. So I'll play my buddy's favorite song off the record. This is called Raiford, the Felon Wind. And as always, thank you guys for listening, and we will see you next week.